Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. I hope you can hear me. If anyone can let me know that you can hear me, then we can get started.
We can hear you.
Great. I'm sorry I'm having challenges with my video. I didn't want to hide my face, but the video is not working for me. I just want really to acknowledge the presence of a couple of colleagues who have a significant experience with the negotiations about the access and the benefit sharing on the digital sequencing information on genetic resources. I have had the chance to participate in recent session of the negotiations at the Convention on Biological Diversity sometime in August this year. And I was with Michael, and it's from there where we had the idea of this webinar, because I can be frank with you that in most of the cases, for people who are not familiar with the negotiations, they are quite tedious and complex in a way or another. And I guess today the speakers will be able to demystify the apparent complexity, which is the main reason for us to meet and to have this webinar. It's indeed a timely webinar as we gear towards the 16th Conference of the Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity. The negotiation on the access benefit sharing of the digital sequencing information on genetic resources will be very, very critical and probably will dominate the discussions in Cali, with the hope that this time we will be able to reach an agreement and be able to implement the approach in terms of the benefit sharing and also the mechanism related to the benefit sharing. I can easily say that it's not an easy task, but before I hand over to Michael, who's going to moderate the technical part of this webinar, let me share some rules of engagement. So if you just joined us and you are quite new, even if you are familiar, please introduce yourself for the others to know. You can do so in the chat, probably put your name, the location, and if you don't mind, your contact information like an email. We recommend everyone to remain muted until you take the floor, once you are given the floor. That allows us to have a better communication. In terms of the chat, we would like to limit it to the introduction. So for the Q&A, we are encouraging you to use the Q&A session for any question you have. The speakers will try to monitor the questions and be able to answer them gradually, but we also hope to bring some of them in the plenary discussion if we have enough time for Q&A. Of course, we would like to continue engaged with you, so my colleague Vanessa will put a contact information in the chat so that we can continue engaging. And something that I should probably have started with is to inform you that we are recording in the interest of colleagues who have requested really to be able to listen in because they could not make it due to competing priorities, and we hope it's okay with you. And with this, I will stop and hand over to Michael for the introduction of the webinar and the speakers, and also the moderation of the technical part of the webinar. I'll be back during the Q&A. Michael, please.
Hi, thanks, Gargata. Yeah, my name is Michael Halewood. I work in the CGIAR for one of the centers called the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, and I also do a lot of work through the CGIAR Gene Bank Initiative, which you'll see up above my head in the background screen. Look, this webinar, and I'm going to start sharing my screen if I'm able to. Just one moment. Yeah, this webinar is based on the assumption that a lot of people, a lot of those of you who have tuned in, are already quite familiar with what's been going on over the course of the last 5 years in terms of the international community and different UN fora working towards the development of new rules having to do with benefit sharing from the use of digital sequence information. So we're not going to go back and look at how it became a hot issue, despite the fact that that's what's covered in this slide, and what's been happening in the recent years that's led up to where we are now. Instead, other than to say, well, quite in broad strokes, most genetic diversity has evolved in the global south. There are deep concerns worldwide about unequal capacities to take advantage of genetic resources. International ABS laws that were designed to redistribute benefits have largely not delivered. These include the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Plant Treaty, and that the recent advances in generating and using digital sequence information are, of course, exciting, represent exciting new scientific possibilities, but they also risk increasing the inequality of capacities between the global north and south to take advantage of science and to take advantage of genetic resources. And international laws to date have tended not to focus on DSI as the object of regulation, but instead cast DSI as a benefit to be shared. And so this has created a gap which a lot of the world is calling to be closed in the form of new norms under different international instruments to close that gap. So, to set the stage, though, I'm really going to limit myself to reminding us that there are currently 4 UN fora involved in looking at developing new rules for DSI, 2 of which we're not going to mention at all. That has to do with the work under the UN Oceans Treaty to develop benefit sharing for materials beyond the limits of national jurisdiction, and the WHO Pandemic ABS instrument. Those are important, but we're not talking about those today. Instead, we're going to be looking at just 2 of these processes and how they can be made to relate to each other in ways that help and don't hinder individuals and organizations that are engaged in the conservation and sustainable use of genetic diversity, particularly in the agriculture sector. So, there have been lots of webinars up till now. The closer we get to COP, the more intense the amount of activity, the more the number of webinars, informal meetings. We very much hope that this webinar, with its focus on the mutually supportive implementation of new norms for benefit sharing from DSI under the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and under the CBD, or under the Plant Treaty, integrating benefit sharing for DSI into the multilateral system, will stand as a useful contribution. I just want to note then that we do have these 2 parallel processes. COP15 under the CBD in December 2022 made the decision to create a multilateral mechanism for benefit sharing, including an international fund, and set to work a working group on benefit sharing and digital sequence information. Also created an an informal advisory group to advise that group. And the scope of that work is benefit sharing on DSI, excluding human DSI. And its work is meant to be wrapping up later this month at COP16 with the adoption of a recommended solution, if you will, the details of a multilateral mechanism for benefit sharing by COP16. The 2 co-chairs of that process are Will Lockhart and Mfatso Kalemba, and we have the benefit today of having Will Lockhart as one of the speakers. In parallel, starting just a few months earlier, the governing body of the Plant Treaty, the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, relaunched a process of negotiations to enhance the functioning of the multilateral system of access and benefit sharing under the Plant Treaty. And it created a working group for that purpose. And the scope of the work of that working group is plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, and the potential expansion of the scope of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture that are included within that multilateral system of access and benefit sharing, and a solution for benefit sharing for DSI associated with those genetic resources. Now, that process has a little bit longer. It's meant to continue until November 2025 when it wraps up. The co-chairs of that working group are Sunil Archak and Michael Ryan. And again, we're very lucky to have Michael Ryan here to speak to us today. And I have to say, it's exciting. It's something that as a stakeholder who works under both the CBD and the Plant Treaty, we're excited to see both co-chairs from both of these processes together in one meeting and look forward to their remarks for how they see the 2 processes that they're overseeing can be made to fit together. So, Without further ado, I just want to talk about how we're approaching the agenda. The next speaker will be Isabel Lopez Noriega, with whom I work closely in the CGIAR, and she's going to talk about why mutually supportive implementation of both of these instruments that are in the making is so important to those of us working in the agricultural sector. That'll be followed by a presentation by Rory Sackville-Hamilton, also with the CGIAR, about how DSI is generated and stored and shared and used in agricultural research and development, and implications that the new uses that DSI make possible of genetic resources have for benefit sharing and equitable benefit sharing, both from the use of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, but also for DSI. Thereafter, having set the scene, we get the opportunity to hear from the two co-chairs of the two different processes. And we'll start off with Will Lockhart, and he'll give a quick overview of where things stand in terms of the development of the multilateral mechanism under the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And he's going to focus in particular on the triggers for payment that are under consideration, and then reflect on how mutually supportive implementation with the plant treaty is being considered and talked about until now. We'll then have a discussion or presentation by Michael Ryan, co-chair of the Plant Treaties Ad Hoc Open-Ended Working Group to enhance the functioning of the multilateral system. He too will give a quick description of where things are, focusing in on those, we don't call them triggers for payment under the treaty, but that's what we're talking about, the means by which payments would be made, the conditions under which payments would be made by users, and again, reflect on how the process being developed under the plant treaty can relate to, in a supportive way, that which is being developed under the CBD. Thereafter, we're going to have reflections from 5 different stakeholders. So not country representatives, but stakeholders who work in the field, stakeholders whose activities fall under a combination of both the plant treaty and the CBD. So first we'll have Yasmina Mumanovic, man, I had it better than that before we started, from Bayer Crop Science, so from the private seed industry. Then Francois Meyenberg from Pro Speciaria, which is a civil society organization. Antonio Onorati from Via Campesina, which is a peasants organization. Then I myself will speak on behalf of International Agricultural Research, to be followed by Amber Schultz talking about from the perspective of a microbial institute. Well, you know Amber, she's also the coordinator of the DSI scientific network. If we all stick to the time that we've agreed to up front, we should have half an hour or so for questions and answers and a final round of reflections from the co-chairs and from the other stakeholders. So without further ado then, I will pass on the floor to Isabel, and she can take over the screen and make her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, and hello, everyone. I'm going to start my presentation. It's going to be a short one. My idea is to answer the question, why do agricultural researchers care about the relationship among international rules on benefit sharing for DSI? So why is this relationship between negotiations taking place under different conventions important for us agricultural researchers? I'm going to try to respond to this question using an illustrative example that is very close to my heart as a Spanish person who cannot live without eating olive oil. This example is about Xylella fastidiosa, which is a very dangerous plant bacteria, which causes a wide range of diseases with huge economic impact on agriculture and the environment. 4 of the species of Xylella fastidiosa have been commonly reported, and they can be found in almond, peach, plum, coffee, citrus, and a wide range of wild species, including oleander and oak. This bacteria lives in the plant xylem tissue and is commonly spread by insect vectors feeding from the plant xylem. Historically, Xylella fastidiosa was limited to the Americas. However, in 2013, it was identified in Europe, most notably in olives in the Apulia region in southern Italy. and particularly the Italian participants in this webinar will be very familiar with this event. Only 4 years after the bacteria was identified in the Italian olive trees, this pathogen had caused serious damages to more than 6 million olive trees in this region. And since then, Xylella has been reported in certain areas of France, Spain, Italy, and Portugal. This map, the map on the left-hand side of the screen, shows the suitable areas for Xylella in Europe based on climate, and this map evidences the huge threat that this bacteria represents for olive production in Europe. Action against Xylella fastidiosa relies on interdisciplinary and collaborative research involving the study of species that belong to different natural kingdoms. And this study is making very vast use of DSI, of these species that belong to different kingdoms. This image shows the different types of organisms that are being studied in relation to olives infestation with Xylella fastidiosa. On the left-hand side, insect vectors are being identified. They differ depending on the region. There is no evidence of vector specificity, meaning that any implicated insect in every region is capable of transmitting any strain of Xylella fastidiosa. However, the pace of the bacterial spread very much depends on its insect species characteristics. And this is why DSI helps scientists understand variation across possible vector insects and implications of this variation for the spread of the disease. Of course, DSI is fundamental to identify the subspecies of Xylella fastidiosa that affect every crop and wild species, and to understand in a reliable manner the relationships between the bacteria and the potential hosts. DSI has been generated to identify the genetic basis of those characteristics or abilities of Xylella that make the strain, the different strains more or less virulent, to the point that genes regulating some of those abilities or characteristics have been confirmed. At the bottom, we have the olive tree, the sequencing of the olive tree genome and the resequencing and genotyping of a range of olive varieties has allowed to identify markers related to traits of resistance. These have to do with the plant's response to drought stresses induced by the pathogen, but also to other mechanisms. This work, combined with large-scale phenotyping, has allowed experts to identify around 20 varieties of olive trees that exhibit high resistance to Xylella and which are being promoted in the areas of incidence and potential areas of incidence of the pathogen. Finally, on the right-hand side, the use of DSI has also been crucial for understanding the role of microbiota in protecting olive trees from the disease. Scientists have demonstrated that the diversity of microbiota is higher in less susceptible varieties, and the comparison of genetic data of cultivar-specific microbes has allowed scientists to identify specific bacterial taxa that interact with the Xylella fastidiosa, protecting that particular olive cultivar. The sharing of data and findings across this interdisciplinary work is leading to distinct products that are of value for the agricultural and food sector, mainly resistant olive trees, but also biocontrol technologies and services. In addition, this work is also enriching the knowledge about how to manage Xylella in wild species in natural habitats, particularly in sensible and protected areas. The genetic resources and the information that are supporting the development of these products and this enriched knowledge fall under different ABS regimes. Genetic resources and associated genetic data of insects and microbes, including the strains of Xylella fastidiosa, will fall under the ABS rules of the Convention on Biological Diversity, including the new rules on DSI that are being negotiated. And the genetic resources and DSI of olive trees will fall under an enhanced multilateral system of APS under the plant treaty. If the rules under these two systems are too complicated, are not coordinated, do not recognize each other, are not harmonized, continued scientific work to protect olive against Xylella may be very much affected. There are many cases like this in the agricultural sector, in which agricultural researchers depend on DSI of different species and kingdoms to understand complex natural relationships and interactions. They need to exchange data about how these different genetic data about the genes that regulate the traits of importance in these different species to be able to come up with products, first with knowledge products, and then with commercial products that help the agricultural and food systems to evolve, develop, and adapt. There is a big concern that the establishment of benefit-sharing rules for different types of species, depending on where they sit, these species belong to in the international negotiating fora. The establishment of these benefit-sharing rules for different species may result in duplication or triplication of benefit-sharing procedures and payments. And this is why coordinated establishment, harmonized development of different benefit-sharing rules is important for the agricultural sector. I'm going to leave it at this, and I will be happy to answer questions at the end if there is any. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Isabel. And I think that example really does illustrate very well why it's important to ag research, that these regimes are working together well. And we're going to hear more about potential downsides if they don't from stakeholders later on. I'd like to turn now to Rory Sackville-Hamilton, and he's going to talk about the use of DSI in ag research. Rory, can you take the screen and share your screen? So far we can see you, but
there we go.
cannot.
There we go.
There we are.
Sorry.
Perfect. Thank you.
Got my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. So hello, everyone. As Michael said, I'm going to start by describing in very broad terms how DSI is generated, stored, shared, and used in agricultural research, and then consider the implications for equitable benefit sharing. I want to start by noting that DSI comes in many forms, even if you only look at genomic data. Getting high quality, complete, accurate sequence data on whole genomes is still very time consuming and costly, and very few organisms have been sequenced in this sense. In the vast majority of cases, we either accept low accuracy, or we sequence just a specific small section of the genome, or especially for crop improvement, we rely on genotyping with genetic markers where we don't necessarily even know the precise sequence differences between plants. So here we identify 4 different groups of PGRFA to highlight that the use of DSI is linked to the access to and use of plant genetic resources as physical material, and that the optimal types and use of DSI varies with the type and use of PGRFA. DSI is not the final product, but just a research and breeding tool to create the material product. And the vast majority of PGRFA and DSI are used for analysis and comparison purposes. Once you have the dependence of phenotype on genotype, once you determine that, then you can start to use DSI, for more efficient and effective plant breeding. Similarly, we can identify many different groups of stakeholders, whether they're public sector, private sector, sequencing consortia, or crop improvements. They all have different purposes, and they're using DSI and genetic resources in different ways. And the result is a complex ecosystem where DSI are scattered across multiple databases. The International Nucleotide Sequence Database collaboration is commonly used for the raw data of nucleotide sequences, with multiple crop-specific portals with various audiences, such as breeders with specific data sets or tools. The amount of data and the diversity of uses is so great that this is the only way to meet the needs of each community. And a common feature of it is open access for scientists and innovation. I just put this up as one of many examples, could have put up any of many others, where cassava breeding has distinctive needs, which they are meeting through a dedicated portal. It works because they have been able to tailor it to their own needs without having to merge their system into a common global database. So let's turn now to benefit sharing. Before DSI, traditional crop improvement was based on in vivo replication of units of heredity. You cross a female and a male plant to create offspring, and you select the best offspring, hopefully good enough to be a product. And in this case, the incorporation of genetic material into a final commercial product is a sound basis for fair and equitable benefit sharing. That's how the plant treaty works, and that's how most CBD agreements work. DSI changes this, and we've identified 3 aspects that have implications for benefit sharing. First is that DSI delinks the use of genetic resources for research from their use for development. Second is that DSI-related technologies enable in vitro and in silico replication of units of heredity. And third is that DSI enables discovery of unrelated genetic resources containing the same sequences. I'll go through each of these in turn briefly. So on the first point, almost all sequence data and most genotyping data and a large and increasing proportion of genetic resources are used in the research phase to understand the complex dependence of phenotype on genotype. We've already mentioned the use of reference genomes where you have high quality complete sequence data. And there's also a case of genome-wide association studies that can involve hundreds or preferably thousands of samples from different countries. The outcome of all this research is the knowledge and the tools that are needed for more efficient and effective product development. With this knowledge and these tools, you can focus on a very small set of genetic resources and a small part of their genomes. This would be a big problem for bilateral benefit sharing based on incorporation of genetic material into products, as is normally the case with the CBD. And this would obviously be grossly unfair and inequitable, as it would fail to recognize the value creation enabled through all the genetic resources used to create the knowledge and tools. It's not so much of a problem for the plant treaty because it already has a multilateral system which shares these benefits fairly and equitably regardless of how the materials were used. It's potentially only a problem for the treaty where the knowledge and tools are monetized other than through developing material products. However, we can argue that information can be monetized only to the extent that it enhances the development of material products. And so to continue the plant treaty's process of benefit sharing, monetary benefit sharing based on material products is arguably the sensible way forward. Then we have in vitro and in silico replication of units of heredity. So here I'm referring to genetic modification and gene editing, which enable in vitro replication. And with synthetic biology, we can go a step further, replicating units of heredity on computer disks before recreating DNA and incorporating them into material products. I don't actually see this as a big problem because neither the CBD nor the treaty define units of heredity, nor do they restrict the processes by which units of heredity are replicated. So there's nothing to say that in silico replication is outside scope. So it makes sense to acknowledge that they are within scope and you don't need to amend the CBD or the treaty to bring them within scope. Thirdly, we have the issue that was recognized as a loophole in the plant treaty's multilateral system many years ago now, that you can use materials that you obtain from the MLS or other ABS regime during the research phase to discover a desirable sequence and then find or obtain the desired sequence in an unregulated source and use it for product development. This is a real problem, and it exacerbates what is known in the plant treaty circles as the avoidance problem, where there's a strong temptation for users to seek to avoid monetary benefits. To avoid monetary benefits. This just makes that problem even worse. So we are forced to conclude that benefit sharing in the era of DSI can only be fair and equitable if it delinks payment obligations from the incorporation of DNA sequences into final products, and if it recognizes, reflects, and rewards the value contributed by DSI through upstream research. What could that look like? Well, this depends on the negotiators who are still negotiating, but it could, for example, involve aggregated payments on whole portfolios of products, whether they were developed using Access DSI or not. And this seems to be the favored approach in the plant treaty. There could be contributions from users based on a percentage of additional fees for cloud-based services. That's one proposal. Or there could be contributions from DSI service providers who provide reagents, sequencing, analysis, and so on. That's for the negotiators to decide, and we are not the negotiators. So I will stop there and say thank you. And with that, I shall stop my sharing my screen.
Great, thank you, Rory. We plow on now, and William Lockhart has joined us. Welcome, William, and we will give you the floor.
Thank you, Michael. Do tell me if you can't hear me, but I think already you can, so that's great. Good time of the day, everybody. It's the afternoon here in a rainy London. Thank you to Michael and everyone at CGIAR for organising this. It's a brilliant opportunity to take stock of a really important issue for us all, actually. And I can build actually immediately on the two great presentations we've already heard. So it's a really good opportunity to do that. I'm one of the co-chairs of the current process that's going on under the CBD on the negotiations on digital sequence information. It's a big job, but luckily I stand on the shoulders of giants. The global sort of negotiators and the stakeholder team on this issue are absolutely fantastic. I won't speak for long because there's a good session for Q&A at the end, but I do think there's some things that I can really helpfully pass on to you. So as you all know, of course, the convention itself, the CBD, the actual text, the original 1992 text makes very clear that that access and benefit sharing is one of its objectives. So while physical genetic resources are the sovereign property of nation states, those countries should provide access to those, but where that access is provided, the benefits should be shared where those benefits arise from that access. Obviously, you'll be familiar, of course, as well with the Nagoya Protocol adopted in 2010, which tries to formalize some of those arrangements with respect to physical genetic resources. Now, of course, as we've just heard, that worked very well in an era where it was quite difficult to get your hands on genetic sequence information. It is no longer the case that it is difficult to get your hands on that information. It is cheap to sequence, it is cheap to make available, and certain governments, in particular governments in the global north, have made it their business to make a lot of that data freely available for the purposes of open science. Now, of course, there is an equity issue there, given that the convention lays out what it does. And so the question for some years has been, how should the CBD respond to that equity issue? And what we've seen since COP14 has been a really impressive sort of multi-stakeholder process to effectively move from this high-level problem, if you like, how do we ensure that benefits from the use of DSI are being shared, through to ever closer to a solution for a system. So in between COPs 14 and COP 15, so that's the process between 2018 and 2022, so still a few years ago, but I'll sort of start there for you. There was a very long process actually through a number of different groups looking at lots of different policy options. So how could we, in theory, potentially ensure that benefits from the use of digital sequence information are being shared? And at the time, those two sort of, there was a large number of options, but they fell into two broad categories. One category was to try and create bilateral arrangements of the kind that we have with the Nagoya Protocol, but tailored to online genetic resources. And the other was a recognition that actually a multilateral approach might be more effective. That brought us to COP15, which took place in 2022, and the decision, COP decision 15.9, which contains a set of really important paragraphs, actually, really important sentences. There's a set of paragraphs about what a solution for sharing the benefits, what that solution should deliver. And so it's very clear, for instance, that it shouldn't impact on open access to data. That's important as a global good. That's important when, for instance, there's a pandemic afoot and that information needs to be shared. It shouldn't hinder research and innovation. Again, that is something that, you know, is by and large a benefit to humanity. And any mechanism should generate more benefits than costs. Now, in recognition of, that's just a few of the principles, but in recognition of all of those principles, the decision went on to say that therefore, a multilateral mechanism is probably going to be the most effective way of meeting those principles. So COP15 also decided to establish a multilateral mechanism for sharing the benefits from the use of DSI, and it also established a global fund, which would effectively be the body that would share the benefits that accrue. That, of course, you know, was 2022. We're now close to the end of 2024. Since then, we've been busy. We have met 2 times as a sort of in an intergovernmental working group forum, and we've met several, I think, oh gosh, about 10 times as an informal advisory group, which has run a very similar process, right, to the one that ran between COP14 and COP50. We've looked at a number of different policy options for operationalizing a multilateral mechanism, and we have over time basically reduced that using the criteria that were laid out in decision 15.9 to really a very small number, which remain on the table just ahead of COP, so following our second meeting of the working group. I think what we've realized quite early on is that decoupling the question of access from benefit sharing is likely to be the only and certainly the most practical way of delivering a multilateral mechanism. We've recognized that tracking and tracing is very difficult. We've recognized that the way that this digital sequence information is used means that it's very difficult to precisely know who has used what in the generation of what kind of product. And so there's been a big move, I think, among the global community towards this notion of decoupling access from benefit sharing. That leaves us effectively going into the COP now in only a couple of weeks with 2 big options on the table. One is an option, we call them triggers, but one is an option that says that a proportion of the benefits that derive from the use of DSI in particular products or particular services. So you take a particular product and a particular service that has used DSI, and a proportion of the profit or the revenue or the benefit that has resulted from the use of that DSI in that product or service, that should be paid into the global fund. That's trigger 1. Trigger 2 is slightly different, and trigger says, actually, this is wider than particular products and services. This is about sectors as a whole. There are certain sectors that simply benefit from the use of DSI more than others. Those sectors which do benefit should simply put a proportion of their profit or their revenue or the benefits that they derive from the use of DSI. But effectively, as an individual company, a certain amount of your overall sort of economic footprint should be put into the global fund, because that's the kind of value that you're seeing from the use of digital sequence information. Both those options are, challenging for lots of different reasons. Neither of them are perfect, but they seem to be the options that negotiators are most interested in. They've been worked over extensively in the meeting that we had in Montreal, and I think that they will continue to be worked over at COP, so we're excited to see where they take us. Of course, the really key question that will be on lots of your minds is the question about interoperability, I guess, or working together with other mechanisms and how all of this stacks up. I think that's a really important question. It's a really live question. If you are interested in looking precisely at where negotiators are at on this, then we can make sure that you have the link to the recommendation text that is going into COP. And in particular, you'll want to look at paragraph 25. I think the way I would characterize the discussion on this is to say that there is really broad support to make sure that the work that we are doing in the CBD forum is in complete sort of cohesiveness. It's completely, with the phrase we use a lot, is mutually supportive of the work that's going on in other forums. Now, what that means in practice is that negotiators want to find a way that we can come to a solution that works for the CBD, but we leave, we respect, if you like, the mandates of the other forums and the processes, because it's right that they have their own mandate. And of course, they're dealing with their own type of genetic material, which may or may not be different in certain kind of key ways. But the really key thing is that both those independent processes somehow work in a mutually supportive way. And that word's used several times in the draft text, mutually supportive, with a view to enhancing mutual supportiveness and coherence. It actually says that, the draft text actually says that it should be able to adapt. So the CBD mechanism, there's a willingness to adapt to developments in other processes where that makes sense. And I think there's a suggestion that maybe other processes could adapt, to the CBD process where that makes sense. We talk about the word collaboration. So any bodies that might be established to facilitate ABS under other mechanisms should be able to adapt to the ones that we have on the table here. So I think there's a huge amount of willingness to make sure that interoperability, mutual cohesiveness, mutual supportiveness, there's a huge amount of willingness to make sure that happens. I think there are still some questions about precisely how we make that happen. And I think that's why it's great that we're having this webinar and we can keep working with each other in future. Thanks, Michael.
Great. Thank you very much, Will. Lots of food for thought there. And looking forward to more food for thought from Michael. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Michael. Good evening from a cool but sunny Canberra. So just to pick up on a couple of the things that have been discussed so far, I think it's fora that are exploring responses to expectations about benefit sharing from digital sequence information are all starting from very different points and working to very different timelines. So the plant treaty has a functional multilateral system for access and benefit sharing for plant genetic resources. And while the treaty provides access to a very substantial pool of plant genetic resources and facilitates hundreds of exchanges daily and is supporting sharing of benefits, it's not achieving its full potential. So some years ago, a process was launched to enhance the functioning of the multilateral system. Digital sequence information has, through that process, come out to be one of the 3 hotspots that were yet to resolve. I think, as Michael touched on at the start of the seminar, the plant treaty are working towards a resolution for consideration at our governing body in 2025. And a number of contracting parties have made it clear that there's no appetite for an extension to the working group mandate. So it's very much a time-limited process, and everyone's working extremely hard. So we're having 4 physical meetings over this biennia in order to get to that meeting, and as well as a number of informal consultations and the like in sort of virtual meetings. In particular regard to digital sequence information, genetic sequence data, like most fora, I think there is a strong division of views between contracting parties on the nature of digital sequence information, in particular whether it is genetic material or whether it's information about genetic material. Those contrasting points of views are strongly and sincerely held, and there is no obvious way forward on a solution that relies on a definition of digital sequence information. So the working group are working around a pragmatic solution to address the expectations about benefit sharing. There is no agreed text to build on, but we do have an approach that's broadly acceptable, and we're continuing to build on that. But it's very much a work in progress, what I'm going to outline about where the working group's at. So I think the first thing that's guiding the way we're approaching it is that we're using digital sequence information as a placeholder term, and therefore handling our approach to benefit sharing from digital sequence information in the resolution to go to the governing body rather than the legal texts of the work we're doing. So we're doing an amendment to the treaty and an amendment to a revision of the standard material transfer agreement that underpins exchange under the multilateral system. The resolution that we're discussing talks about recognising that benefit sharing payments to the benefit sharing fund include a contribution from the use of digital sequence information towards the commercialisation of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, and implicit in that it's irrespective of where the digital sequence information is sourced from, and that the contribution of digital sequence information isn't quantified. Elements under discussion also recognise the challenges of tracking and tracing and express support for open access, as well as elements under discussion on capacity building to support capacity to generate and use digital sequence information. Resolving how we approach digital sequence information in the plant treaty is linked to the outcomes in the other two hotspots under discussion in our process. So one of those is expansion of the multilateral system to reflect the scope of the treaty. And the other one, which is particularly important for digital sequence information, is around the payment structures and rates for contributions to the benefit sharing fund. So there are two payment options under discussion. Potentially could be just to use one, or potentially two payment options. That's still to be resolved, and we're working through that actively at the moment. So under one approach, which is called the subscription system, users of the system would agree to make an upfront payment to the benefit sharing fund over a period of time, and that would be against their portfolio of products. And as I said, that that payment would include recognition of that a proportion of it is attributed to digital sequence information. The second payment option that's under discussion is what's colloquially called the single access option, and it's about making payments after a particular product is commercialized, and how that that option would accommodate expectations about benefit sharing from digital sequence information aren't resolved yet. I think, as William stressed, very much strong support within the plant treaty for a mutually supportive outcome, and we're watching other processes to see where there are areas we can adapt and incorporate. This is a novel issue we're all dealing with, and inspiration we can draw from others is key. I think to support that, there's cooperation really at two levels that are fundamentally important. At the international level, and there is good cooperation, particularly between the CBD Secretariat and the Plant Treaty Secretariat, with flow of information. And between the co-chairs, we've had some discussion and an open invitation to discuss as it's useful and appropriate. But the other level of cooperation that I think is really key is at the national level, and it's about contact points for the plant treating, contact points for the CBD Secretariat, communicating actively with each other in the lead up to a couple of key meetings for both processes. So that's where I wanted to leave it and see where the questions go.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. Yeah, before we get to questions from the audience, we want to now hear from the stakeholders who are familiar with both processes, but have now heard from both of you, and to hear back from them, from their stakeholder perspective, what concerns they have if these instruments aren't implemented in mutually supportive ways, and principles and must-have conditions that they would like to see in both working together as we go forward. So in that context, first, we're going to turn to Yasmina. Yasmina, you have the floor.
Thank you, and I hope you can hear me and see me well.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, Michael, you just briefly introduced me, and I forgive you for not pronouncing my family name correctly. It's Muminovic. It's a tough one, Serbian. I just wanted to, very briefly to say a little bit about myself, and maybe also use that to explain why am I part of this conversation today. And thank you again for inviting me. I'm a trained plant breeder, so I'm a breeder and a population geneticist. And throughout my career, I actually focused on managing in-company gene banks. First, the company gene bank of maize in my homeland, former Yugoslavia, now Serbia. And then for the past 17 years, I lead our genetic resources effort in vegetables in Bayer, the huge multinational company. So part of my work is the typical classical germplasm collection management, making material available to be used by breeders, by geneticists, by pathologists, by anybody in R&D. We have also worked together, me and other colleagues from different teams, co-developing internal tracking and tracing mechanism in our enterprise system. And part of my job is also participation in different collaborative efforts with different public research groups, with gene banks and universities, mainly on conservation of biological diversity of genetic resources, but also some different specific projects on understanding better the genetics of material that's going to be used in different breeding efforts in different places, private or public. So like I said, why am I telling this? Because, why am I here? Because I think all these experiences were very helpful to me to understand the practical side of the things, practical impact of access and benefit sharing on R&D, because we needed to understand better how to access, how to use, how to collaborate. And we've seen examples of, being more successful and less successful because of the different ABS obstacles on our ways during many of these projects. So for plant breeding sector, as I guess everybody on the call already knows, the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity is of really very, very high importance. It is a cornerstone of innovation, but it's also the clear strategic objective to help nature with reasoned resource effort, preserve and improve life on Earth. And if you look at the Bayer mission on my background, so health for all and hunger for none is what we are focusing on. So this is what we are, this is what we do. So to achieve these different goals, we work with global genetic resources. Well, we are a global company. We work with so many different GRs and DSI. We are present at the global market. And obviously, we are falling within the scope of YOC user in both the treaty and the CBD multilateral approaches. To answer, or actually to start the conversation today, I would rather start from not the concern point of view, but more from the ideal best case scenario. So what would the ideal situation in that mutually supportive implementation world look like? yeah, obviously the first thing is like enhancing benefit sharing would contribute to support CBD goals. It would incentivize research. It will help us develop solutions that are tackling major challenges that we are facing with climate change, with biodiversity, with nourishment, hunger in the world. So like all these issues together. Obviously, to achieve the biodiversity conservation targets, resource targets, benefit sharing is just one of many resources that could contribute to reaching these major milestones. So we need to find ways to avoid clashing of these two systems. In our case, it's the treaty and CBD, but obviously for other industries, for other companies, the situation is also somewhat different. And also as a reminder, so we don't deal only with what is going to be designed under CBD and what is currently being enhanced under the multilateral system of the treaty. There is also a multitude of national laws that we also have to be compliant with. So all that complexity would somehow need to be resolved so that everything continues more smoothly, that we get to where we want to be with the funds of biodiversity conservation, and at the same time do not jeopardize, do not put obstacles on the road, on the way for our innovation, for R&D. So for that to happen, so for that mutual supportiveness to work, some transparent rules and operating procedures at global level should be constructed, should exist. So that would help provide legal certainty to companies, that would help avoid fragmentation, because like I said, we work with not 2, not 3, but many different systems right now. And it will also reduce or hopefully eliminate the risk of double obligations and multiple payments. So for us, it's important to consider what I think we already heard through the presentations of Isabel and Rory. So we need broader material scope. So you cannot really separate DSI from genetic resource, not in the way how you use it, not in the way what value it provides to the final product, and also not in the way how benefit sharing could look like based only on the DSI. Because in plant breeding, DSI is a tool. It's not a product on its own. It's not something that we, market, sell, purchase, buy, and can calculate the revenue on. So to overcome that discrepancy in what we are using and what we are producing and selling, benefit sharing really needs to consider that integrated bigger scope, which is DSI and genetic resources. So how that will work with MLM and MLS, probably in that ideal harmonized way. So what is in the treaty should be different from what is in the MLM. So there should be like clear recognition of like pan-genetic resources for food and agriculture. And ideally, if the treaty would go that way and like the enhancement process would succeed in including all plant genetic resources for food and agriculture and DSI in the scope of the treaty, and everything else in the multilateral mechanism could be an opportunity that could help the process going forward. Obviously, whatever broad multilateral system of the treaty, could be, or would end up to be, plant breeding will still need to work with both systems. So, it would never probably be just like one ideal situation where you like with one payment, with one approach, you resolve everything. But what is interesting and what is important to consider is that we really need to move away from a transactional bilateral views of benefit sharing to something truly multinational, multilateral. So where the payment is estimated or is linked to the value that is gained from the material, from the use of GR, so that private sector is more engaged and contributes better to the overall system. Compliance is a big thing. So how you comply. So there is payment, there is access, but there's also compliance. So how do we make compliance easy, and whether an opportunity would exist to have a single payment or maybe 2 payments, MNML, MLS, to secure ABS compliance at global level. So that's really important for the industry, because we need to have predictability when we start our R&D. We need to know what legal certainty we have to act with different material, to use different material in different parts of the world. So which kind of license to operate, so called, would that payment and compliance ensure to us? So yeah, this bigger scope, so full material scope and payment into, you know, a mechanism or a set of mechanisms that are like perfectly aligned would, in our opinion, help ensure that license to operate at, you know, across all countries at, you know, global level. And yeah, would also mean that, you know, there is some future proofing aspect to that. So like whatever we do would be covered by one or the other system. So there should be no need to, you know, go further into analyzing. So what are the next research outcomes or the directions, or, you know, where new regulations could eventually go forward. So yeah, these consistent global rules would help, you know, also establish known costs. So understand, so what is the cost of work? It could help us with compliance. It could help us, you know, be quicker. It could also help countries more easily monitor what the companies are doing. So let's say this is a part of the bigger picture. We can obviously talk about it going forward. Yeah, and yeah, what would be the threats? What would be the concerns? It just like everything in reverse, opposite. So if the systems are not mutually supportive, it would be very hard to manage complexity for compliance. And there would be probably, I guess, fear or, you know, an unwelcome reality that companies would try to avoid as much as possible, the fragmented hybrid landscape which you cannot navigate easily. So that's just how business works. It would also cause very high administration costs for everybody, for the users, but also for the providers. And it would definitely pose huge threat to innovation, to collaborative partnerships in public-private space. I will leave it at that. So I hope I'm not too much over my 5 minutes, and yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmina Mamidovic.
There you go.
Without further ado, okay, Francois, your camera is on. Please take the floor.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks for the invitation. Just before I start, in recent years, to be clear, I focused on the treaty process, and this also means that my input now is really shaped with this experience. I would like to focus on two topics. One is the interface between the treaty and the CBD, so really the topic of this webinar, and related to this also the question of intellectual property rights. And be assured, I know there are much more topics to be discussed, but I will focus on this too. The invitation to the webinar speaks about ensuring mutual supportiveness. I think there is another aspect which is also central, and this is complementarity must be ensured. In the discussion, there are often warnings, and we just heard it again, of the danger of double payments, which must be avoided at all costs. I think this fear is exaggerated. 30 years after the adoption of the CBD and the requirement for benefit sharing, we all know that the real danger is not double payments, but that no benefit sharing is paid at all. Therefore, the negotiations and the interlinkage between the treaty and the CBD must primarily ensure that no one falls between two stools. That is, that all actors who derive a profit from the use of DSI participate in benefit sharing. I don't think it will be rocket science to draw a clear line between the treaty and the CBD when it comes to the obligation to share benefits arising from the use of DSI. The demarcation should not be at the time of access, but based on the payment. This means, as you already know, we are developing in the treaty a so-called subscription system. If someone has access to the multilateral system of the treaty, so to the gene banks of the CG or to the collections of the member states, they will pay a subscription fee based on the seed sales to fulfill the obligation for benefit sharing. This benefit sharing should also cover the use of DSI. In this way, Subscribers under the treaty would have fulfilled the obligation for benefit sharing, including benefit sharing for DSI, and should not longer be liable under the mechanism under the CBD. Only speaking about the sales, the seed sales. We know there are a lot of companies, for example, engaged in pesticides and seed sales. It's clear that the subscription system will only cover the part on plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. And this means in turn that all those who are not subscribers under the treaty will automatically fall under the mechanism developed under the CBD. For this to work, it is essential that the multilateral system of the treaty be recognized as a specialized international ABS instrument under CBD DSI mechanism, as it is already the case in the Nagoya Protocol. For such benefit sharing system to work, certain basic principles must be followed. First, it must be legally binding and circumventions must be made impossible. Under the treaty, this is supported, among other things, by the fact that the treaty itself and the multilateral system is a legally binding agreement, and that benefit sharing is additionally regulated in a contract, the SMTA. Secondly, the system must be as simple as possible. I think this is core. From experience, we know that a complex system is very difficult to implement and to enforce. And thirdly, the subscription system also has the advantage that it solves benefit sharing for material and DSI together. This way, we don't have to worry about the gray area where it is unclear whether the benefits comes from the DSI or from the use of the material itself. For the end, I would like also to address another key topic in this context and in the discussion about DSI. One argument that is heard again and again is that access to information must remain free. The same demand applies to material under the treaty. Therefore, what must be avoided at all costs is that this free access is used to prevent further free access with patents. That is why there is an article in the treaty and in the SMTA that stipulates that recipients shall not claim any intellectual property or other rights that limit the facilitated access to the plant genetic resource for food and agriculture or the genetic parts and components in the form received. In the further negotiations under the treaty, we will have to ensure that this, of course, also applies to DSI, as it makes no sense to facilitate access in order to enable its blocking. In the treaty, we have a good starting point with the current wording to ensure that intellectual property does not block further access to the system. But the relevant articles must now finally be implemented and enforced, as this is not the case so far. I can see that a lot more work is needed on this subject under the CBD, but I hope that this issue will also be addressed there as well. Thank you very much.
Well, Francois, that was the advantage of both being very clear and short. We turn now to Antonio. Antonio, please take the floor.
You can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you also for the discussion is going on. But first of all, I would thank Francois, because he's the only one along the meeting that essentially speak very clear about IPR. I was very surprised, I have to say, that the previous speaker don't touch the issues that link DSI and all the IPR system. Or just a small presentation. I am a farmer here in Rome, of a small-scale farmer of an organic, and I am a member of the working group of biodiversity of the European Coordination of La Via Campesina and the Global La Via Campesina. And sorry for my bad English, but that's the situation, and I try to be clear. And first of all, in the logic, who we represent the small-scale farmers. That is a system of production. It is an economy, where the seeds are one of the key issues, of course. And just to this, I will remember very quick the fact that on DSI, the first time that was openly discussed in FAO, in the meeting of the treaty, was many years ago with the other General Secretary of the treaty, where we present a press release where we show the fact that the treaty under the table was negotiating an access to the material for the beginning of digital sequences information system to one of private network. Just coming on this webinar. First of all, benefit sharing is not real our strong preoccupation. Just to be clear, really, we don't believe, and we have the proof till now, that the mechanisms that were in place or can be modified by the treaty or by the CBD will produce money that goes to the farmers and to the indigenous people to conserve, preserve, produce, reproduce agrobiodiversity. We really don't believe. For this, our discussion is more on the precondition that are fundamental for us. And Francois just says, but I will repeat, our main issue is for the farmer, the prohibition of any intellectual property right on PGRFA, including parts and components. And this is something crucial. The second element that is strongly linked to this, on the SI, we really please researcher and the state to stop to do the narrative about DSI as data, DSI as information. Anyone that is sitting in this webinar know perfectly, if they work in industry, they work in international research, or if they deal with the governmental responsibility, they know perfectly that DSI is a system of information that capture knowledge. It is exactly, the word says, like the materials. That means stop to discuss, to try to confuse, and go in a real discussion, on concrete discussion, that DSI are information, are genetic material. They need to be treated as you treat the seeds. Again, this enlarges the question of the patent and the intellectual property right to the products that come out of DSI. Again, clarification. We don't believe that the work that is done by industry and the work that is done by public research institutes are the same. We understand the work of the public research, but we don't believe, we don't agree that the industry used the access as a research when we know perfectly that they will produce goods, new variety. And we don't believe that what they tell us, that they have captured the elements that are incorporated in new variety in free access somewhere or in database, open access, or other private collection. These elements came from materials that was present and captured in the field of farmer and the indigenous people. And the one key element that was just discussed in last COAG meeting, it is proved by the strong interest on the neglected and the wild relatives now, because what is storage in the gene bank, maybe it's not enough. On the other side, again, we think that to solve the problem of open access imply a ban on claiming intellectual property rights. You will, of course, criticize us to be using these issues of patents as a kind of mantra. What do we try to defend? We have never have the time to explain. We are defending farmer seed system, indigenous people seed system. On the base of these two systems that are strongly different from the commercial seed system that we recognize that is another world. We know the real economy, we know all these things. Our farmer seed system has a crucial element on autonomy. And autonomy of the farmer seed system is based on the capability to access the material, to control the material, and to have all the capacity without any legal obligation, if you want, that can stop us to do this. Extension of the patents with new breeding techniques or other through the synthetic biology, they will transfer to our feeds the characters that are there. And we never will accept. There is no money to pay this. And this needs to be very, very clear. I end with the two different arena where DSI is discussed and the benefit share is discussed. We think that complementarity approach deal better with what we really try to have. It is why there will be a delegation also in the COP from La Via Campesina. Again, to be clear, the two systems of benefit sharing need to work. We will not accept that someone says, I have paid there, I will not pay on the other side. It depends what products you are selling. And at the end, it's true. Do things simple. There is a very simple manner to have a fund to support the conservation of agrobiodiversity in the field, in the banks, in the wild. Put a mechanism of taxation to the income, the profit you decide of seeds company on the material that they sell out that can be that are not reproductive. If you want, everything is not on open varieties. This can be a very simple way. In another sector of industry, agree to contribute to maintain the sources of their own material that they will use to realize products that go to the market. Whilst its company, last 25 years, they resist. I think they have a large budget that will be not a disaster, that will be a way to stop very long, sometime unuseful discussion, and to come to be a real beneficiary mechanism that first need to be finalized to support agrobiodiversity in the field of peasant. The majority of the peasant and the indigenous people, as you know, are in the south. thank you all for invite. Sorry for the explanation. Of course, we have a lot of material and we have participate, but for us, such discussions are very hard because there are a lot of things that are not put on the table on the real economy that is behind of this discussion. Thank you. I don't hear you, Michael.
Thank you, Antonio. Yeah, we are against all our efforts running out of time, and we haven't all spoken. I'll be as quick as I can to leave time for Amber, and then a set of reflections from the speakers, co-chairs, and maybe some questions. What does it mean to be mutually supportive in this case when we're talking about these two instruments? It means that the boundaries between them have to be clear. It means that there shouldn't be gaps between them through which users and potential benefit payers should fall. And it should be absolutely clear when they apply to different people under different circumstances, and they shouldn't apply to the same people under the same circumstances. Now, in this context, it's worth pointing out that both under the plant treaty and under the CBD, contracting parties are moving towards triggers for payment based on commercialization of products. So in that sense, that makes things easier than it could be. But it's also important to point out in this context that under the CBD, the enforcement for the payments by users would be by virtue of contracting parties agreeing to put laws, policies, and other measures in place to require those payments from the commercial users within their borders. Under the plant treaty, it's different. Here, the requirement to pay depends upon the user entering into a contractual obligation, in this case, a subscription fee. So they're not obligated to make payments if they don't subscribe. So yes, we have payments on products, but the obligation mechanism is different. So can these two systems be made mutually supportive with the criteria or subject to the descriptions I just gave of what constitutes mutually supportiveness? And I think, yeah, you know, there's an option for this, and it has to do with the fact that under both systems, the contracting parties are moving towards increasingly de-linked mechanisms for benefit sharing payments and triggers. So, for example, under the option B, under the CBD, there's this notion that commercial users would pay on all products that are relevant within their sector or on revenues derived within their sector. And similarly, under the plant treaty, those who enter into a subscription would agree to make payments on all products, regardless of whether or not you track and trace the use of DSI in those products. So you've got different enforcement mechanisms, but similar concepts in terms of what constitutes the basis of payment. So then if you think about option B under the CBD and the definition of the sectors that comes in enclosure, I think it's enclosure A, you would have a definition of a sector and you could just exempt from the definition of those sectors the payments on products that would count under the plant treaty. And those are, to date, new plant PGRFA products, which could be seed varieties and optimized traits and so on, linked to Annex 1 materials. So under one system, you'd have payments on products linked to plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. And if you make those payments, you should have access to all the world's DSI that's available through the open access infrastructure. And similarly, if you're making a subscription, you've got some kind of indemnity that says, look, I've made my benefit sharing payments. If you're not a subscriber, then yes, you're going to end up falling underneath the CBD. So the overall point here is that not only can these be made to work in a way that it's fairly clear which payments should be the subject of benefit sharing under the different mechanisms, but that payments made under the different instruments should entitle users who made those payments access to all DSI. There is no need to fragment DSI, leave it as a collective whole, a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. No need to extend the jurisdictional divide between instruments to the DSI linked to the genetic materials under those instruments. The DSI can stay open and whole. The payments can be made subject to delinked benefit sharing payment requirements and triggers under each of the instruments. Now, that's the way we're going now, because the CBD has been going down a certain path and the plant treaty is going down a certain path, and it's highly unlikely, I think, that either one is going to rejig the formulae that it's considering so that they're identical. But of course, another option would be that the plant treaty adopts very similar mechanisms for for benefit sharing for DSI and leaves the multilateral system for materials. I personally think that that's not the most desirable for the ag sector, but it's another option that's on the table in terms of thinking through the mutual supportive implementation of these two mechanisms. Just in summary, we have a paper coming out, and this is a way of introducing Amber next. A number of people from the CGIAR, a number of people from the DSI Scientific Network have contributed to a paper on mutually supportive implementation, where we identify these two different options as one door through which payments are made and four windows through which payments could be made out to the different four mechanisms, or four doors and four windows, meaning four mechanisms for payments and four distribution mechanisms. The point is, in both of these houses, the DSI stays unfragmented and available to researchers, regardless of the kinds of products that they're developing. Look, in the interest of time, I won't say more, and I'll hand over the floor to Amber right now. Thank you. Amber, are you there? And can you take the floor? And
I am, I can, and I hope it works because I am on a hotspot here in Greece at the largest university in Eastern Europe, it turns out, the Aristotle University. Hi, everyone. I'm going to deviate from the other panelists. And Michael, I am setting a clock, so I'm aware of the time. Michael had asked me to give you some insight into what kinds of ABS indicators the world is thinking about and how they inherently and deliberately connect the plant treaty and the CBD and its instruments. So in case you don't know, Goal C and Target 13 are the ABS things in the Kunming Global Biodiversity Framework. Parties want to increase benefits shared by 2030, 2050, and those benefits should come from digital sequence information, and they have to capture benefits from all applicable international access to benefit sharing instruments. So this is super interesting for this crowd thinking about harmonization, mutual supportiveness. But we don't actually know how to measure benefits. We're really good at implementing legal frameworks, but we're less good at measuring outcomes so far. And so the CBD commissioned the DSMZ and a group of authors to put together this study for ideas to parties for how to measure ABS outcomes, measure benefits shared. And that report went as an INF document to the CBD's meeting in Nairobi last May, SBSTA, and through the ad hoc technical expert group focused on the monitoring framework. And to make a long story short, the indicators for ABS now read as monetary benefits received bilaterally and multilaterally in accordance with internationally agreed ABS instruments. And then the non-monetary benefit indicator is the number of research and development results from ABS agreements shared. This is important because here you can see in both indicators, we're again linking the different ABS instruments, whoever wants to sort of play nicely with the CBD. The way that works in practice is as followed, and monetary benefits are somewhat easier compared to non-monetary benefits because they can be measured in terms of the amount of money received, and they can be aggregated across countries as well as other international ABS instruments. For genetic resources under the Nagoya Protocol and CBD, countries will need to keep national records on monetary benefits. That's something that will be challenging for some countries, but will be necessary to make the indicator work. And for multilateral instruments, you basically can just report on the fund. So this sort of cartoon below says national reporting on monetary benefits shared, the CBD DSI Global Fund, the Plant Treaties Benefit Sharing Fund, BB&J if they wish to, WHO if they wish to, and you add that all up, and that would be your KMGPF C.1 monetary benefits shared aggregate number. That's the way that this could be done. Non-monetary benefits are not as easy. So we did a survey last fall about this time, and we know that parties place a high importance on them, but yet they don't have much information on them. We also noticed that there are 17 different types of non-monetary benefits in the annex to the Nagoya Protocol, and the text also makes it clear that this is a non-exhaustive list. So there's even more than 17. And then countries also told us in the survey that there are many other kinds of benefits that they find important that aren't in that list. So how to measure things? You cannot measure dozens of things in an indicator and add them up across multiple ABS instruments and countries. You have to find a way to make that a slightly tighter package. The proposal we made in the study was as follows: to categorize monetary benefits into 5 categories and 6 types of non-monetary benefits. And those are the indicators we're proposing under C.2. So, and I'm not going to go into the details of this, but the categories are here on the left. The new globally collected indicators are on the right. And these are the number of research and development results arising from ABS instruments, the number of scientific publications relevant to conservation, sustainable use, food security, public health, the so-called priority research areas, and the number of joint publications, particularly where appropriate, with authors from the provider country. And those can actually be globally collected, and that's another story in and of itself that I won't get into here. And then the 3 other categories are capacity building, tech transfer, and sustainable development projects. And those, there's no good way to capture that data globally. So the proposal in terms of implementation is these 6 types of benefits, 3 collected at the global level, 3 collected nationally. And with this framework, the hope that we can aggregate across national ABS frameworks, international ABS instruments, and then ultimately disaggregate back to the countries back to the national reporting that's necessary under the KMGBF. So again, you would have for each of those 6 different types of non-monetary benefits, you would have the bilateral system on the left, the DSI system, the plant treaty, BB&J and WHO, and then that would add up to your C.2 non-monetary benefits indicator. So we've been doing this work for the regular ABS for genetic resources that have an ABS permit, and Genio Nunez Vega in my group here at the DSMZ has showed how to do this for 700 different ABS permits that he's identified in scientific publications and shown the outcomes from that. And we've also been able to show through the Wild DSI project that we could do something similar for DSI. And this is just an excerpt. It's not done in the indicator kind of way, but it's to show you the number of authors from outside of a country who have used the country's DSI in their scientific publications. So this is possible. And the other important message is this is actually not terribly difficult to do also for Annex 1 plants. Or if you expand the annex and you include many types of plants, this is also possible to do for many kinds of plants. So these might be really useful indicators and places where the CBD and the plant treaty can say, let's do it the same way and aggregate our data together. Similarly, you can categorize publications into these research priority areas to get the indicator C.2.2, and also look at joint scientific publications and in-country authorships where we know the country of origin of the genetic resource or of the DSI. And have done this again for DSI and could also again do this for plant treaty. So here's what you would need to do if you were a policymaker. At COP16 and at your next plant treaty meeting, governing body, you would basically need to say, we want to do C.1 and C.2 as defined under the KMGPF. Step 2 is you would want to try to show how you can capture global non-monetary benefits as proposed by the study. to apply them to DSI from CBD world and DSI from plant treaty world. And then for those other kinds of non-monetary benefits that aren't part of scientific publications, you might even think about a joint global ABS non-monetary benefit sharing platform or clearinghouse where users can self-report. And I think that a collaboration here between the plant treaty and the CBD could be extremely powerful. And here, just take a quick picture of this if you're at COP. Here's a side event that will tell you more, not quite so fast. And the links to the relevant CBD documents, I can also put them in the chat. And with that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Amber. Really appreciate it. I'm turning over the floor to Gargale.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike, and thanks to the speakers. And it was really wonderful discussions. We've gotten a few interesting questions. Unfortunately, my camera still don't cooperate, sorry for that. But there is probably, we won't have time to go into Q&A, but at least there are some key messages over there to keep in mind. One is really how to make sure that there is a significant transparency for those who are using the DSI in the work they do, and they are able to generate some kind of form of profit from there, how they can significantly and in transparent manner contribute, and also be able to communicate with the different instruments put in place, and how the access and the benefit sharing could also not contribute to inequality exacerbation in a way or another. How do we make sure that we have a better control to inequalities is not used to exacerbate the inequalities. So these are some of the really key questions we have gotten in the Q&A. We try to find a way to address them. And thank you for being patient with us. We have gone beyond the time we have allocated to this. So what I will do is to invite the two coaches, each of them really to use maximum 1 minute to give us their feedback based on the discussion we just had, and how we can be able to also contribute to the process to enhance what we are looking for, which is ensuring the mutual supportiveness of what we do. So back to the coach who either want to go first, either William or Michael.
I guess it looks like me. I blinked first. So I think I came into the meeting feeling positive about prospects for mutually supportive outcomes, and certainly coming away continuing to be positive about it, but also in the context of the plant treaty discussions, we've been very mindful that we're on we call it a narrow but viable path to a successful outcome, and it's really challenging. There's lots of sensitivities to be navigated through, and I sort of just come back to the points I made towards the end of my discussion about just the critical importance of communication, cooperation at the national level between plant treaty and CBD contact points. Keep the dialogue going so that we do continue to move forward in a way that's mutually supportive and positive. And I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Michael. In case we still have William with us. Since I don't hear from William, probably it's almost time for us to wrap up. So Michael, any quick comment before I can put almost make the last comment for today?
Well, just thank you very much to the 173 people who have stayed on, despite the fact that we've gone over time. Yeah, we'll try to do something to think of ways to respond to some of the questions, if there's a way of following up on that. And to thank you, Gargale, for stimulating us and help putting this together, and to the speakers for attending. It's really very much appreciated. You know, we're in the final stretches as we move forward to Cali, and then from Cali on to the governing body meeting of the treaty next November. So yeah, all hands on deck, and I'm optimistic that we're moving towards a mutually supportive and set of resolutions in both instruments. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Michael, and also thanks to the Gene Bank Initiative, the CGIAR Gene Bank Initiative that has accepted to organize this side event with us. We thank all the speakers, but also the audience, because that they have made the webinar really live. And as you said it, Michael, really having people who are still around, over 163 of 229 is kind of highly appreciated, and it shows how the topic is quite relevant. We know it will keep us busy in Cali, so this is just the beginning of our discussions. I guess we will have another webinar after Cali. But before that, we also welcome you to join us in the next webinar that will be probably in November, where this time we will focus on the agrobiodiversity index, something that probably will be of interest, and I think I will not miss on Antonio in terms of the people to join us for the agrobiodiversity, and also the accelerator for the national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And for Amber, I do believe your topic is quite interesting. Really, how do we monitor and see how access and benefit sharing is happening? And I do believe the time was not enough. We hope we will have you for another webinar in the coming days. With this, I wish you a good day, good evening, or good night, depending on where you are. And we keep in touch. There was a comment in terms of knowing whether some of the slides could be shared. I will work with Vanessa and see what can be done. And bye for now.